Good evening. It is Boris. Before we begin, take a slow breath with me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Let your shoulders drop. Let the day step back. Tonight we will walk quietly through the past and ask a simple question. How did people relax when life was heavy and the world was loud in a different way than today? No screens, no endless scrolling, no gentle playlists, yet the same human heart, searching for calm. We will visit banquet halls and silent cloisters. We will lie down in temples built for sleep and listen to waters that people once called holy. We will open small cabinets filled with curious objects and sit in gardens designed only to soothe the mind. Some methods will feel wise, some will sound strange, all of them will reveal a truth that still matters. Rest is not a trend, rest is a practice. I will be your guide. You can close your eyes if you like. Imagine soft rain on a window. Imagine the room dim and kind. If a thought rises, let it pass by like a slow cloud. You are safe here. You are allowed to be still. Let us begin. Imagine a long stone hall filled with gold and laughter. The light of oil lamps glimmers on polished bronze. You can almost smell roasted meat, honeyed wine, and the warm scent of perfume mixed with sweat. It is late in the evening in ancient Rome, and you are not simply eating, you are performing a ritual of excess. A Roman feast was never just dinner, it was theatre. Senators and poets reclined on couches while servants carried endless trays of food. Conversation flowed like the wine, and so did vanity. The goal was not nourishment, it was control. To eat beyond comfort, then command the body to obey the will. In a world of power and hierarchy, even pleasure became a show of discipline. You may have heard of the word vomitorium. Many imagine a special room where diners went to empty their stomachs before returning to the feast. It sounds both horrifying and absurd, and that is why the myth survived so well. But the truth is more architectural than biological. A vomitorium was simply an exit passage in an amphitheater designed to let crowds flow quickly in and out. The image of Romans casually purging between courses came later, shaped by centuries of fascination with their decadence. Still, myths persist for a reason. The Romans did practice controlled purging at times, often in medical or ritual contexts. Physicians advised it as a way to restore balance, a cleansing of excess humors from the body. It was not done at the table, yet it reflected a deeper belief that relaxation could be achieved through release, through the physical act of letting go. Imagine the psychology of that culture. The same society that built aqueducts and conquered empires also built elaborate baths for washing the mind. Cleanliness and control were intertwined. To relax, a Roman might sweat in a steam chamber, scrape the body with oil and metal, then plunge into cold water. The process was physical, rhythmic, and strangely modern. They understood that the body could not find peace while heavy with tension or indulgence. At the heart of the Roman idea of rest was rhythm, feasting, cleansing, bathing, conversing, sleeping. Everything in order, everything measured. To them, leisure was not idleness. It was the art of balance. Too little indulgence was dull. Too much, a sign of weakness. The ideal Roman found calm in the act of mastery itself, even mastery over appetite. But beneath that discipline was anxiety. The Roman elite lived surrounded by power, ambition, and the constant threat of downfall. A single rumor could erase a career. The feast, with its laughter and abundance, was also a stage of tension. You could not relax when every gesture might be judged. Perhaps that is why stories of the vomitorium felt believable. They symbolized a civilization that needed to purge not only its stomach but its guilt. Listen to the sound of that hall again. Cups clink. Someone quotes a line of poetry about fleeting joy. Another boasts of a villa by the sea. The laughter is bright, but underneath there is fatigue. To live always seen, always performing, is its own kind of strain. Even in pleasure they sought control. Even in luxury they could not rest. And yet, in quieter corners of the empire, away from the feasts, Romans discovered simpler ways to unwind. In the baths of Caracalla or the smaller suburban Thermae, the noise faded to murmurs. There, the ritual was reversed. Instead of consuming, people released. The heat loosened muscles, the cold revived the mind, and conversation drifted without purpose. It was the closest thing to meditation they knew, the moment when the empire's pulse slowed and everyone, for a brief while, felt human again. So perhaps the myth of the vomitorium, though false, reveals something true, that we often mistake indulgence for peace and purification for punishment. The Romans believed balance came through cycles of tension and release. Eat, purge, bathe, sleep, work, command, withdraw, reflect. Even the most powerful sought a rhythm that felt safe. If you think about it, not much has changed. We chase the same rhythm with different names: the detox, the cleanse, the digital fast. We still want to feel light after feeling heavy. We still treat relaxation as a task to complete rather than a state to inhabit. So, as you listen now, imagine setting down the cup, wiping the wine from your hand, and stepping quietly out of the marble hall. The air is cooler outside. The city hums like a distant ocean. You do not need to purge, to perform, or to impress. You can simply breathe. The Romans built their lives around control, but peace never came from mastery. It came, briefly, in the moment they forgot to try. Perhaps that is the real lesson hidden beneath the myth, that the body does not need to be conquered to rest. It only needs permission. Close your eyes and imagine the desert at night. The sand cools beneath the stars, and the wind moves softly between pillars of carved stone. Somewhere beyond the dunes stands a sacred complex, silent except for the slow crackle of an oil lamp. This is a place where people did not come to pray in words, but to rest, to dream, and to listen. In ancient Egypt, sleep was more than the body's surrender. It was a doorway. The Egyptians believed that the mind could cross between worlds when the body was still. The dream temples were built for that purpose, sanctuaries where citizens could sleep in the presence of gods, hoping for guidance, comfort, or healing. A pilgrim would purify before entering. Water poured over the skin, scented oils rubbed into the hair. The act of cleansing was not decoration, it was preparation. One must arrive clean, humble, and receptive. Then, guided by priests, the dreamer would lie upon a mat or stone bench near the statue of a chosen deity, perhaps Imhotep, the god of medicine, or Serapis, the lord of renewal. Offerings of bread, honey, or flowers were placed nearby, small tokens meant to please the divine. Then came silence, the air heavy with incense, the heart slow with expectation. Sleep, they believed, invited the gods to speak. If a person dreamed of a serpent, it might mean transformation. A dove might signal healing. A hand touching water could signify cleansing from illness or guilt. These were not random visions. They were messages, recorded carefully by temple priests who acted as interpreters of the night. Some came to these temples with pain in their body. Others came burdened by grief or uncertainty. A farmer might travel for days to ask whether his lost child was safe in the afterlife. A widow might seek peace from sorrow. A soldier, shaken by war, might lie down hoping for a dream that forgave him. Each sought rest, but what they truly wanted was meaning, the comfort of knowing the universe still listened. Archaeologists have found inscriptions left behind by grateful dreamers. They describe how a god appeared during sleep, spoke gentle words, or touched a wound that later healed. To the modern mind, these are fantasies, perhaps products of exhaustion or suggestion. But within those walls, surrounded by symbols of eternity, the effect was real. Sleep became sacred. The mind, unburdened for once, could rest in a story that promised care. The ritual of dream incubation was both spiritual and psychological. It gave structure to uncertainty. When life felt chaotic, the temple offered a script for peace. You entered tired, anxious, and small. You left with a dream, a message, a thread to hold on to. Whether or not the gods had spoken, the silence had. In many ways, it was an early form of therapy. The priests of Imhotep listened, translated, reassured. They gave meaning to what frightened their visitors. In return, the dreamers gave thanks, built shrines, or simply slept more deeply that night. It was an exchange of calm belief for relief. And it is easy to dismiss this now, to think that we have outgrown such rituals. Yet even today, people close their eyes and hope for guidance before sleep. We may call it intuition, subconscious wisdom, or inner voice, but the desire is the same. We want sleep to fix what waking cannot. We want the night to speak. Imagine lying there yourself, the floor cool under your body, the air heavy with incense and faint sound of breathing from others around you. Somewhere a priest murmurs a prayer to guide your dreams. The flame of a lamp flickers against the wall, making the gods seem to move. Slowly, the edges of the room dissolve. Your body feels light, your thoughts drift, and you begin to fall. Perhaps this was the Egyptian secret, that rest was not escape but surrender, that to find peace, one must trust the dark to hold them. In a world filled with labor, heat, and endless ceremony, the temple offered something radical, the right to stop. When the dreamer awoke, they did not rush. They sat quietly, remembering every image, every feeling, then spoke it softly to the waiting priest. The sun rose, lighting the sandstone gold. Another message had crossed the threshold between worlds. So, as you listen tonight, consider this. Maybe the greatest luxury in any age is not wealth or comfort, but the faith that something gentle waits for you in sleep. The Egyptians built temples for it. We, perhaps, only need to close our eyes. Picture the coast of ancient Greece at dawn. The horizon glows pale silver. The sea breathes slowly, waves folding over each other like pages of a book. Somewhere above the water, on a quiet hill, a man sits cross-legged with eyes half closed. He is not praying. He is not sleeping. He is listening. To the Greeks, silence was not absence. It was presence, a space where truth could appear. They called it hesychia, the stillness of mind. Long before anyone used the word meditation, philosophers treated quiet as a discipline. They trained themselves to observe without judgment, to watch the constant movement of thought until it settled like dust in sunlight. Thinkers such as Pythagoras and later the followers of Plato believed that harmony existed not only in music and mathematics but in the soul itself. A noisy mind was like a dissonant chord. To restore balance, one must listen not to the world, but to the rhythm inside. Students would sit in silence for long hours, learning to hold their questions until the teacher spoke. The lesson was patience. The silence between words mattered more than the words themselves. For the ordinary citizen, life in a Greek city was crowded and loud. Markets, festivals, arguments in the forum. Silence was rare, which made it sacred. Some temples reserved inner chambers where no one was allowed to speak. The visitor entered barefoot, inhaled the cold scent of stone, and simply existed. To stand still before the divine was considered an act of wisdom. Poets wrote of the value of listening. In fragments of old text, we find lines that say, roughly, that wisdom begins in quiet, not in debate, not in triumph, but in the pause that follows both. The Greeks saw conversation as a living thing. For it to breathe, silence was the inhale. Imagine the soundscape of that world, cicadas in the heat, a lyre echoing from a courtyard. Then, suddenly, nothing, just the heartbeat and the air. In that nothing, a thought would rise. Perhaps that was the point. By stripping away noise, one could hear what the soul had been trying to say all along. This practice of listening extended to daily life. Sailors watched the wind before speaking. Artists studied the marble before cutting. Even in politics, the wise man was the one who waited longest before replying. Silence was power, because it showed control. But it was not easy. The Greek philosophers wrote about how the mind rebels against quiet. It wants to fill every gap with sound, every pause with opinion. To master silence was to master oneself. They compared it to tuning an instrument. At first, the strings are tight and discordant. Slowly, with care, they fall into balance. The silence between the notes becomes music itself. There is something beautiful in that simplicity. No incense, no divine visions, just breath, awareness, and the patient acceptance that peace cannot be forced. Modern life often confuses stillness with boredom. The Greeks understood that silence was not emptiness. It was a mirror. What you see in it depends on how willing you are to look. In certain schools, initiates took vows of partial silence. For a set number of days, they would avoid unnecessary speech. They walked, worked, and ate quietly, observing their own reactions. The goal was not punishment but clarity, to know yourself without the constant noise of opinion. Some wrote later that in those days they felt closer to the divine than in any temple. It is easy to imagine them now, walking among olive trees, the wind moving through branches, footsteps soft on the dust, their minds unhurried, their breath deep. The same landscape where arguments once roared with passion could also hold a silence so complete that even thought seemed to kneel. Perhaps this is why Greek philosophy still feels alive. It was never only about abstract ideas. It was about practice, how to live, how to think, how to rest. The art of listening to silence was their way of aligning with something larger than themselves. When you listen now, you might hear a faint echo of that ancient calm. The hum of your own room replaces the sea, yet the invitation is the same. Let the noise inside you fade. Do not rush to fill it. There is no lesson waiting, no reward to earn. Only awareness, only quiet. For the Greeks, silence was both teacher and cure. It did not demand belief, only attention. And perhaps, if you listen long enough, you will find what they found, that beneath all thought, beneath all words, there is a still space that has been waiting for you since the beginning of time. Imagine a warm evening in the ancient world. The sun has lowered behind the hills, painting the stone walls gold and rose. The air smells of wine, of bread cooling on clay, of the faint smoke from oil lamps being lit one by one. The streets are quieter now. For a few hours, the ancient world exhales. To us, relaxation is something gentle, something separate from work or worship, but to the ancients, rest and pleasure were inseparable from duty, faith, and order. They did not draw sharp lines between the sacred and the sensual. A bath could be spiritual, a feast could be moral, sleep could be a form of worship. What mattered was balance, the harmony between body and soul. In Greece and Rome, philosophers argued endlessly about pleasure. Some saw it as the enemy of wisdom, while others called it the natural reward of living well. The Epicureans taught that true pleasure was not indulgence but freedom from pain, a calm simplicity born from moderation. The Stoics believed peace came from mastering desire, not escaping it. Between these views, the idea of rest evolved into something almost mathematical, the point where effort and release met perfectly. In Egypt, pleasure was closer to gratitude. The gift of food, of song, of sleep after heat and labor was seen as divine mercy. A good life was not one of constant joy but of measured satisfaction. Even the most elaborate feasts were followed by purification rituals, as if to remind the body not to forget humility. The line between pleasure and punishment was thin, like the line between prayer and habit. Across these cultures ran a shared belief. Rest was not idleness, it was alignment. The body, the mind, and the spirit were not separate things but parts of the same design. To neglect one was to harm the others. A Roman might visit the baths to cleanse his skin and his conscience. A Greek might walk by the sea to balance thought and feeling. An Egyptian might sleep in a temple to restore harmony between heart and body. Each saw peace as something that had to be earned, not taken. Yet the ancient world also feared idleness. To do nothing without purpose invited chaos. The gods might see it as disrespect. The community might see it as weakness. So even rest had to be framed as a kind of action, meditation, ritual, study, healing. The quiet moment had to serve a higher order. That tension still lingers in us today. The guilt of stopping, the need to justify calm. Still, they knew pleasure intimately. The laughter of friends in the shade of a courtyard, the feel of cool water after walking through dust, the music of a flute at night while the stars opened like flowers above the city. They did not chase constant stimulation. They returned to simple joys again and again, like sacred patterns. The feast and the fast, the song and the silence, the sweat and the sleep, art and rest were twins. Potters shaped clay slowly, breathing with each spin of the wheel. Painters mixed pigments not in haste but in ritual, watching colors merge like thoughts. To create was to enter a rhythm beyond effort. The Greeks even had a word for the serene pleasure of attention, schole, the root of our word school. Learning and resting were the same act, both requiring focus without strain. In their stories, the gods themselves rested. After creation came pause. After battle came stillness. The divine was not only powerful but calm. To imitate the gods meant to know when to stop. This was the lesson woven into myth after myth, that rest was not escape from life but part of its rhythm. And yet, they never lost the taste for indulgence. The ancient banquet, the temple festival, the midsummer games all were chances to celebrate the body, to remind the weary heart that joy was holy too. They did not apologize for pleasure, they feared its excess. The trick was to hold joy lightly, like a fruit that could bruise if gripped too hard. Perhaps that is what they understood better than we do, that rest and pleasure were not opposites, but two breaths of the same body. One without the other led to imbalance. Work without celebration hardened the soul. Pleasure without pause dissolved it. Between those two, peace waited quietly. So when we speak of ancient relaxation, we are not talking about leisure as we know it. We are talking about rhythm, about knowing when to act and when to surrender, about listening to the body without guilt. The ancients lived close to the cycles of nature, day and night, flood and drought, feast and famine. They built their rest around those rhythms, trusting that stillness was as necessary as motion. And perhaps, as the lamps burn low and the night deepens, we can borrow their wisdom to rest, not because we have earned it, but because it is part of being alive, to find pleasure not in distraction, but in awareness, to remember, even for a moment, that peace is not hidden in distant temples or marble halls. It is here, in the quiet breath between effort and ease. Imagine the chill of a stone corridor before dawn. The air smells faintly of wax and parchment. A bell rings once, slow and heavy, and the echo drifts through narrow arches. In a few moments, the monastery will wake. The monks rise silently, their robes whispering against the floor. No one speaks. The first words of the day will not be their own. In the Middle Ages, silence was not simply absence of speech. It was a discipline, a wall built to protect the soul from noise. Life inside the cloister followed a rhythm older than any clock. Work, prayer, rest, reading each had its appointed hour. Among these, one practice stood apart. The monks called it Lectio Divina, the divine reading. It was not study. It was not performance. It was slow, deliberate, and deeply personal. A monk would sit alone with a text, perhaps a psalm or a passage from a sacred book. He read not to learn, but to listen. Every word was tasted like bread. Each sentence became a breath. Reading aloud in a whisper, he let the sound travel through the room and return as thought. If the mind wandered, it was gently brought back. There was no rush to finish. The goal was not understanding, but communion to meet the divine in the pauses between the words. This was how monks rested. The outside world labored and fought, but within those walls, stillness was an act of resistance. The slow rhythm of the words calmed the pulse, quieted the imagination, and drew the mind inward. The act of reading became the act of breathing. It might seem strange to us now to call reading a form of relaxation, but in those dark centuries, when storms of war and plague shook every kingdom, inner peace was not found in comfort. It was found in ritual. The monk's peace came not from escape, but from order, the certainty that every moment had meaning, every breath a purpose. When the mind grew restless, the rhythm of the chant restored it. Lectio Divina was both prayer and meditation, centuries before such words were divided. One monk wrote that the slow reading of holy text was like dipping a cloth in water again and again, until the fabric of the soul became soft enough to absorb grace. The practice followed 4 stages. The first was reading to encounter the text. The second was meditation to turn the words over like stones in the hand. The third was prayer to respond quietly to what the heart had heard. The last was contemplation to stop thinking altogether and simply dwell in presence. In that silence, time itself seemed to fade. Of course, not every monk found peace so easily. The mind rebelled, the body ached, fatigue crept in. The temptation to rush or to daydream was strong. That struggle was part of the ritual. Rest was not given freely. It was earned through attention. To remain still in body and mind was its own discipline. Imagine the sound of it, a single voice murmuring Latin verses, the scrape of a quill, the soft sigh of pages turning. Outside, wind brushes against the shutters. Inside, the silence thickens like warm cloth. This was not boredom. It was devotion to calm. The benefits were not mystical alone. The slow breathing, the steady gaze, the measured rhythm of thought all soothed the nervous system long before such terms existed. The monk may have called it prayer, but his body knew it as rest. In a way, Lectio Divina was the medieval world's answer to anxiety. It trained the mind to focus, to move gently instead of racing. It transformed reading into refuge. And though its purpose was spiritual, its gift was universal, the quieting of noise. We might smile at the simplicity of it, yet the idea endures. Today we speak of mindfulness, of guided breathing, of presence. The monks had no such vocabulary, but they practiced it daily, in stone rooms where silence was as thick as incense. They did not seek comfort, they sought stillness, and stillness gave them peace. When the reading ended, the monk would close the book slowly, touch its cover to his forehead, and return to his tasks. The rhythm of labor resumed, tending the garden, baking bread, copying manuscripts, but something within remained quiet, as if the words continued breathing through him. That was the true rest of the monastery, not sleep but harmony, a life so measured that even effort became serene. So, as you sit here listening, think of that monk with the candle beside him, eyes soft, lips moving gently with the rhythm of sacred text. The world outside storms and shouts, yet within these walls there is only the whisper of meaning. He reads, he breathes, he listens. In that stillness he finds what most never will, the quiet at the heart of sound. Picture a medieval town after sunset. The streets are narrow, the lamps dim, and the air smells faintly of wood smoke and damp stone. Behind every shutter, life settles into uneasy rest. Families crowd together on straw mats. The noise of animals in the lower rooms mingles with the murmurs of tired voices. Privacy does not exist, and true silence is a rare luxury. For most people, sleep is not comfort, it is survival. Yet, in scattered corners of Europe, there existed something unusual, almost magical in its simplicity. They were called sleep houses, places built not for worship or trade, but for the act of resting well. They offered what the medieval world had nearly forgotten: uninterrupted sleep. To understand their purpose, imagine the life of an ordinary villager. Days filled with labor, from dawn until the evening bell, fields to plow, walls to mend, fires to tend. By night, the body ached, but rest was uncertain. Rooms were shared with family, animals, and strangers. The air was cold in winter, stifling in summer. Insects crawled through bedding. The mind never fully drifted away. Danger could always knock. The sleep houses were different. They were small, sturdy buildings near monasteries or on the edge of towns. Travelers, workers, and the sick could spend a night there for a few coins or a prayer. Some belonged to guilds, others to the church. Inside, the space was simple wooden cots, clean straw, linen washed in herbs, a small fire burning safely behind stone. There were no markets, no arguments, no noise of hammers, only stillness. For those who entered, it must have felt like stepping out of time. The rules were strict: no loud voices, no light after curfew, no food in the sleeping hall. People arrived quietly, left quietly, and in between they slept deeply. Rest itself became sacred. In some towns, these houses were connected to healing practices. Physicians believed that sleep could balance the humors of the body, restoring what exhaustion had broken. Monks prescribed sleep the way others prescribed prayer. They understood, perhaps instinctively, that the body could mend only when the mind was allowed to soften. Inside a sleep house, even the architecture whispered calm. The walls were thick to muffle sound. Windows faced gardens or running water. The air smelled faintly of lavender, rosemary, or ash. In the corner, a candle burned until midnight, tended by a keeper who watched over the sleepers like a guardian. If someone stirred from a nightmare, he would whisper a psalm and let the quiet return. It is easy to romanticize such places, but they were born from need. The medieval world was loud and uncertain. Wars, plague, and hunger left few untouched. Sleep became both escape and medicine. In a time when rest was fragile, a space built purely for peace of body was an act of mercy. Records describe nobles and peasants alike who paid to spend a single night in silence. Some called it a cure for melancholy, others said it brought clear dreams or softened grief. The act of lying down in safety, without fear of theft or noise, was itself transformative. For one night, life's burdens loosened. It is strange to think how rare safety was then. To sleep without keeping one ear open was a privilege. The sleep houses gave that gift to those who could afford it, and sometimes to those who could not. Charity and necessity met under the same roof. Even the monks, who lived by strict vows, understood the holiness of sleep. Some monasteries kept small guest chambers, places for weary travelers to lie in clean sheets and wake to the sound of bells instead of chaos. The morning light through the window, the scent of bread baking in the kitchen, these simple things could feel divine. There are hints that these houses influenced later traditions of inns and hostels, even the early hospitals that valued recovery through rest. The idea that peace itself could heal began here, in quiet rooms with nothing more than straw and stone. When we look back, it feels humble, but imagine closing your eyes there after a lifetime of noise, the floor solid beneath you, the air steady and still. Outside, the town sleeps unevenly, yet here, for once, you are unbothered. You do not need to pray or prove or endure. You are simply allowed to rest. Perhaps that is why these places mattered. They reminded the weary that care did not always mean cure. Sometimes it meant stillness. Sometimes healing required nothing but a door that closed and a night without fear. We often think of the medieval age as dark and harsh, but hidden inside it were small sanctuaries of gentleness, proof that even in times of hardship, people sought not just survival but peace. The sleep houses may be gone, their walls turned to dust, but the longing they answered still lingers in us. The wish for one quiet night, the wish to wake feeling whole. Imagine following a narrow path through a forest, the ground damp beneath your feet, the air rich with the scent of pine and moss. Ahead, you hear a quiet rush of water. Steam rises from a spring that glows faintly in the early light. Men and women kneel beside it, dipping their hands, whispering prayers. Some drink, some wash, some simply sit, eyes closed. They have come not for luxury, but for healing. In the Middle Ages, water was never just water. It was alive, mysterious, and holy. Springs were said to hold the breath of saints, the touch of angels, or the tears of the Virgin. People believed these waters could cleanse the soul as well as the body. A pilgrimage to a spring was a journey toward renewal, a slow, sacred act of letting go. Every region had its legends. A farmer who fell ill would dream of a shining river, wake, and travel to find it. A woman who could not bear a child would bathe where the saint had once walked. The stories grew, carried by word of mouth, and soon the countryside filled with holy wells and miracle streams. Some flowed through forests, others through caves or gardens built by monks. Each had its own rhythm of ritual: drink 3 cups, bathe at sunrise, leave an offering of bread or ribbon. People came from far and wide. The poor walked barefoot, the wealthy arrived on horseback with servants and linen towels. They waited in line to touch the water, sometimes for hours, believing that even a single drop could drive out illness or sadness. To modern ears, it may sound like superstition, yet beneath the faith was an instinct as old as humanity, that nature itself could calm what life had broken. The church often embraced these sites, building chapels beside the springs to sanctify them. Priests blessed the waters, recorded healings, and built stone pools for bathing. Pilgrims slept nearby, lulled by the sound of the stream. The act of immersion became both medicine and prayer. Some springs were hot, some cold, some heavy with minerals that stained the skin. The sensations themselves were part of the cure. The change in temperature, the rhythm of movement, the quiet all reminded the body of its own power to restore balance. Over time, these holy wells began to evolve. By the late medieval period, towns grew around them. Inns offered rest, apothecaries sold tonics made from the same waters, and healers studied their effects. What began as pilgrimage became routine, a ritual not only of faith but of comfort. People no longer came only to be cured, but to be cleansed, to feel lighter, to feel calm. The spring had become a sanctuary for both spirit and flesh. You can imagine the scene on a summer morning, steam curling above a stone pool. A noblewoman sits waist deep, eyes half closed, her hands resting on the surface. A monk chants nearby. The air hums softly with insects. Nothing else happens. Nothing needs to. In that stillness, people found the closest thing to peace their age could offer. Some of these places still exist today, transformed into spas with marble floors and glass ceilings. The pilgrims have been replaced by tourists, the prayers by polite conversation. Yet the desire remains the same, to be renewed by water, to feel that something pure can flow through us and wash away the weight of life. In the medieval mind, rest and purification were one. The spring symbolized the soul's return to clarity. Dirt, sweat, and sorrow all dissolved in the same current. To bathe was to remember that pain could pass. Even those who doubted the miracles left feeling softer, quieter, more alive. It was not only the water that healed, but the ritual itself. The journey to reach the spring, the waiting, the touch of cold or warmth against the skin all slowed the body, drew it into rhythm with the earth. The mind, distracted by struggle, had to pause, and in that pause, healing began. Perhaps that is what rest truly meant in those centuries, not absence of work, but reconciliation with the world. To sit beside moving water was to be reminded that all things flow, even sorrow. So, as you listen now, imagine your own spring, the air cool against your face, the sound of water circling endlessly, never hurried, never still. You do not need to believe in saints to feel its power. You only need to breathe with it, to remember that peace is not a miracle. It is a current we can always return to, if we stop long enough to listen. Picture a stone chapel deep in the countryside. Its roof is low, its windows narrow, and its candles burn with trembling light. Inside, a man kneels on the cold floor. His hands are clasped, his breath slow and uneven. He has come not to ask for comfort, but to surrender it. For him, peace must first pass through pain. In the medieval mind, rest was never separated from morality. To feel ease, one had to deserve it. The soul was weighed constantly. Every indulgence, every pleasure, every wasted hour counted against a higher balance. Rest, therefore, could not be taken lightly. It had to be earned, purified, even punished into being. For monks and believers alike, the body was a vessel both sacred and dangerous. Its desires were suspect, its comforts suspicious. To rest without cause was to risk sin, for idleness was seen as an open door through which temptation could enter. The phrase, "the devil finds work for idle hands," was not a proverb, then it was law. And yet, beneath that fear lay a paradox. Even the holiest man needed peace to serve his God. So rest took a strange form, not indulgence, but repentance. Pilgrims walked for days through rain and hunger to find forgiveness. Flagellants whipped their backs until blood ran down their robes, believing that suffering cleansed the spirit. Others fasted, isolating themselves in small cells, sleeping little, praying much. In exhaustion, they found a stillness that ordinary life could not offer. When the body finally collapsed into sleep, it was not laziness, it was release. Within monasteries, rules were crafted carefully to balance labor and reflection. The monks worked the fields, copied manuscripts, baked bread, but between these acts came silence. Hours set aside not for comfort but for contemplation. To lie down for a short rest after Vespers was not a reward, it was obedience. The soul needed quiet to hear what conscience whispered. In a strange way, this belief preserved a kind of discipline we have long forgotten. The medieval Christian saw rest not as a right, but as a responsibility, a time to measure oneself against heaven. The night became a confessional. Sleep was the shadow of prayer. Every dream might reveal something the waking mind refused to see. Yet the system was not without mercy. Many sermons of the time spoke gently of divine sleep, of the shepherd who gives rest to his flock. The idea of Sabbath, the sacred day of stillness, reminded even the harshest believer that rest was woven into creation itself. God rested, and so should man. The difference was intention. Rest for pleasure risked sin. Rest for gratitude became holy. Imagine a monk walking through the cloister garden at dusk. The air smells of thyme and damp stone. His sandals make no sound. He feels the ache of work in his back, the soft pull of fatigue behind his eyes. He does not resent it. He sees it as proof that he has lived the day rightly. When he lies down on his narrow bed later, straw rustling beneath him, he closes his eyes not to escape, but to give thanks. The body surrenders, the soul listens. Outside the walls, peasants followed the same pattern in their own way. The day ended with prayer. The family gathered by candlelight. The silence that followed was not always peace. Hunger and fear still lingered, but it was sacred all the same. Even the poorest man could claim the dignity of rest if he worked with honest hands. To sleep guiltless was the purest luxury of all. The connection between rest and repentance also shaped art and ritual. In paintings, saints were often shown reclining after suffering, their faces calm, their wounds still open but no longer bleeding. The message was clear. Peace does not erase pain, it transforms it. To rest is not to forget sin or struggle, but to release the burden of control. We might find this logic severe, but it carries a hidden wisdom. Modern rest is often noisy, filled with distractions, screens, endless choice. Medieval rest, when it came, was absolute. No clocks, no interruptions, no guilt beyond the spiritual. The body stopped, the world fell away. What remained was a stillness so deep it could feel like grace. Perhaps this was their secret, that repentance, stripped of punishment, is simply honesty. To stop pretending strength, to accept fatigue, to admit that we cannot hold the world forever. This too is surrender. The medieval believer called it penance. We might call it awareness. So, as you listen now, imagine kneeling in that dim chapel again. The candles flicker. The air is cool and forgiving. You breathe out, long and slow. The guilt, the worry, the endless need to prove yourself, they fade like smoke. You are left only with the truth that rest, at its heart, is a form of forgiveness. The medieval world understood that peace begins when striving ends, and though centuries have passed, that lesson remains unchanged. To rest is not to quit the world, but to trust it for a moment to go on without you. Picture a quiet room in a grand house during the Renaissance. The windows are shuttered against the afternoon light. Shelves line the walls, filled with strange objects, a seashell larger than a man's hand, a preserved lizard floating in glass, the skull of a small bird, a fossil that seems half rock and half bone. In the center of the room stands a man with a candle, turning a compass in his fingers as if it might reveal the secrets of the world. He is not a magician, not quite a scientist, but something in between. He is a collector of wonders. The Renaissance was an age of curiosity. It was also an age of restlessness. The old certainties of faith were cracking, and new ideas were flooding in astronomy, anatomy, exploration, printing, maps of distant seas. For many minds, this sudden expansion was thrilling. For others, it was chaos. In a world where everything seemed to change, collecting became a way to bring order back to the unknown. The Cabinet of Curiosity, or Wunderkammer, was born from this need. Wealthy scholars and nobles built private rooms to house the wonders of creation. They gathered fossils, minerals, coins, coral, exotic feathers, mechanical toys, even the bones of strange animals brought from distant lands. Each item was labeled, arranged, admired. The goal was not display alone, but meditation. To gaze upon the mystery of nature was to feel small and strangely calm. For the collector, arranging his cabinet was a quiet ritual. He would handle each object carefully, wiping dust with a cloth, adjusting its position until it felt balanced. The act itself was soothing. In a time of constant discovery, to create order from chaos was a form of rest. It was an exercise in wonder, not in ownership. These objects were fragments of the infinite, and by studying them, a person could feel part of something vast and harmonious. There is something deeply human in that impulse. We gather shells on beaches, photographs on our walls, memories in drawers. We collect pieces of meaning and, by arranging them, tell ourselves that the world makes sense. For the Renaissance mind, this act was almost sacred. It united science and art, logic and beauty. The cabinet was both a map and a prayer. Visitors were often invited to these rooms, but conversation there was hushed, respectful. The space demanded silence. People would stand before a display and simply look, not to understand immediately, but to marvel. One scholar wrote that to observe the wonders of the world without haste was to imitate the stillness of God. The cabinet, therefore, was not only an archive, it was a temple of attention. Imagine opening one of those drawers yourself. Inside you find a butterfly's wing, its color preserved, still glowing faintly even after years. You tilt it toward the candlelight and see how thin it is, how fragile. Then you notice a rough stone beside it, dull, ordinary, heavy. The contrast is deliberate. Beauty beside weight, life beside death. Each object reminds you that every surface hides another world. This quiet study, this slow absorption, was a kind of meditation. While others debated philosophy in crowded halls, the collector retreated to his chamber to listen to the soft ticking of his own curiosity. The process had no end, no final truth to reach. It was the act itself, the attention, the care, the pause between observations that brought calm. Some historians later mocked these collections as eccentric. Cabinets filled with bones, mirrors, and mechanical birds seemed childish to later scientists. But perhaps those early collectors understood something we have forgotten. That peace often comes not from answers, but from fascination. To be absorbed by something beautiful or strange is to wrest the mind from itself. The Renaissance world believed that studying creation revealed the mind of the Creator. Even the smallest seashell could reflect divine geometry. The cabinet, therefore, was a bridge between the visible and the invisible, between order and mystery. To look closely was to worship quietly, and while these rooms may have been built by the wealthy, Their spirit belonged to everyone who has ever paused to admire the intricate pattern of a leaf or the smooth curve of a river stone. In that pause lives the same stillness the collectors sought. Perhaps, as you listen now, you can imagine your own cabinet. It does not need shelves or glass. It may hold memories instead, moments that caught your breath, sounds that lingered, faces that softened your heart. Arrange them gently. Look at them without judgment. Let their quiet wonder remind you that curiosity itself is rest. For the men and women of the Renaissance, the world was vast, mysterious, and often frightening. Yet by gathering its fragments into a small room, they found peace in pattern. Each fossil, each feather, each shimmering shell whispered the same truth, that to be amazed is to be still, and to be still is to understand. Imagine a candlelit room in the late 18th century, heavy curtains drawn, air thick with perfume and anticipation. In the center sits a man with silver hair and steady eyes. Around him, a circle of patients, women in silk dresses, officers in uniform, scholars clutching notebooks. Their hands rest lightly on a large tub of water filled with iron rods and glass bottles. The man raises a small wand of metal, moves it slowly through the air, and begins to speak in a calm, measured tone. The audience exhales together. Someone closes her eyes. A sigh spreads through the room. This is not a séance. It is therapy. The man is Franz Mesmer, physician, philosopher, and creator of what he called animal magnetism. He believed that every living thing was connected by an invisible fluid, a universal force that flowed through all bodies. When this current was disturbed, illness followed. By guiding it back into harmony, one could restore both health and peace. To modern science, this sounds like fantasy, yet in Mesmer's time, it was revolutionary. Europe was awakening to new understandings of the mind. People were beginning to suspect that unseen forces, emotion, suggestion, imagination might shape the body as much as medicine did. Mesmer's salons became places of both scandal and fascination. Patients fainted, cried, laughed, or entered deep trances. Some swore their pain vanished. Others claimed visions of light and music. But beneath the spectacle, something real was happening. For the first time, people were invited to close their eyes in public, to surrender control without shame. In an age obsessed with reason, Mesmer offered permission to feel. The dim light, the rhythm of the voice, the focus on breath and sensation, these were tools of calm long before anyone spoke of psychology. Mesmer's followers soon experimented with new techniques. They learned that simple suggestion could guide a person into a state of deep relaxation, what they called the magnetic sleep. The body became heavy, the mind quiet, and in that stillness, the patient could face fears or memories that waking life avoided. The process bordered on spiritual. To be magnetized was to be purified of inner conflict. The church condemned it. Scientists mocked it. Yet the idea spread like fire. In Paris, London, and Vienna, people gathered to experience this strange blend of science, mysticism, and theater. A quiet revolution was forming, the discovery that peace might be found not through faith or medicine alone, but through the careful guidance of the mind itself. Centuries later, psychology would give it new names: hypnosis, trance, suggestion, therapy. But its roots lay here, in dim rooms where silence hummed with expectation. Imagine yourself among them, the air warm, the candle flickering, the sound of breathing filling the space. The magnetic rod moves past your face, and you feel the faintest tingle of awareness. You are told to relax, to trust, to allow. The words slow, the pauses lengthen. The body obeys. Thoughts drift like dust through sunlight. time dissolves. For the first time in months, perhaps years, you are doing nothing. It does not matter whether the magnetism was real. What mattered was the surrender. In a world driven by progress and performance, people longed for the chance to be guided into stillness. Mesmer gave them that chance through ritual, through rhythm, through presence. He reminded them that the mind is a landscape of its own, one that can heal if approached with care. Critics later exposed his methods as suggestion rather than science. Yet in doing so, they revealed an even deeper truth, that belief itself can calm the body. To trust, even briefly, is to rest. The ritual of magnetism, stripped of its mystery, was simply a rehearsal for peace. It is easy now to dismiss Mesmer as a fraud, but look closer and you will see how his salons mirror our modern world. The low lighting, the soothing tone, the repetition of words, they are the same techniques used today in therapy, meditation, and even bedtime stories. We still seek the same trance, the same soft border between waking and sleep. Mesmer's dream was to prove that harmony could be restored without pain. No leeches, no bloodletting, no purges, only calm. In that vision, he was ahead of his time. He believed the body could be healed through beauty, music, and grace. And though his science failed, his philosophy endured. Perhaps, as you listen now, you can feel what those people felt, the slow unwinding of thought, the pull towards stillness. You do not need magnets or rituals. The current he spoke of flows in you already. It is called attention. When you focus it gently, the noise fades. Franz Mesmer sought to tame invisible forces. In doing so, he uncovered one of the simplest truths of all, that peace begins when we stop fighting what we cannot see. Imagine a walled garden in the heart of an old European city. The noise of the streets fades behind stone walls. Inside, sunlight falls through the leaves of pear trees. A small fountain murmurs, and the air smells faintly of mint and damp earth. A bench waits in the shade. The world outside rushes and shouts, but here, everything moves at the pace of the wind. This is not simply decoration, it is medicine. By the 17th and 18th centuries, a quiet revolution was growing beneath the noise of progress. Doctors and philosophers began to notice something simple and profound, that people felt better among plants. Hospitals started placing courtyards at their centers. Monasteries opened gardens for the sick, and scholars wrote that the sight of green leaves could lift melancholy more than any potion. It was the beginning of what we now call the therapeutic garden. The idea itself was ancient. The Persians had built gardens as symbols of paradise, places where water and shade promised relief from heat and hardship. The Greeks filled courtyards with olive trees and fountains, believing that beauty purified the mind. But during the Enlightenment, these ideas returned in a new form, shaped by science, guided by reason, yet still reaching for the divine. Physicians observed that patients who could see trees from their windows healed faster. They noticed that walking in fresh air calmed fevers of the mind. They prescribed time outdoors not as leisure but as treatment. One English doctor wrote that a man confined too long to study should walk in a garden until his thoughts grow lighter than the leaves. In these words we see an early understanding of psychology, that the mind, like a plant, withers without sun. The design of these gardens was deliberate. Paths curved gently, leading nowhere in particular. Fountains and ponds created constant motion without urgency. Every sound, from the trickle of water to the rustle of grass, reminded visitors that time could flow without pressure. Even the choice of plants mattered. Fragrant herbs for clarity, flowers for color and renewal, willows for sorrow and release. The garden became an instrument for peace. In monasteries, These spaces served both body and soul. Monks tended them with devotion, planting in patterns that mirrored the geometry of prayer. Each act of care, watering, pruning, harvesting, became meditation. They believed that touching living things restored humility, that kneeling to pull weeds was a lesson in patience. In tending the earth, one tended the self. Outside the cloisters, noble estates adopted the same idea on a grander scale. Landscaped parks appeared, designed not for spectacle but for serenity. Pathways invited long, aimless walks. Benches were placed at points where the view opened into sky. Gentle slopes led the eyes toward distant horizons, reminding visitors that beauty was not to be conquered but contemplated. It is easy to forget how radical this was. The world was racing forward with inventions, machines, and trade. Cities grew crowded, noisy, and grey. To step into a garden was to step out of time, a small rebellion against the tyranny of progress. For an hour, one could listen to water instead of clocks. Writers of the period often described gardens as the physician of the heart. Poets wrote of healing, found not in temples or medicines, but in the quiet company of trees. One visitor to a French hospital noted that patients who could walk among flowers smiled more and quarreled less. Another observed that the dying asked to be moved near the garden's edge, where they could feel the air once more. Perhaps this was not sentiment but understanding. The rhythm of the natural world mirrors the rhythm of breath. Seasons remind us that nothing lasts forever, not pain, not sorrow, not fear. To watch a leaf fall is to remember that letting go is not death but change. The garden teaches this without words. Even now, centuries later, hospitals, schools, and homes return to this wisdom. We bring plants into our rooms, hang pictures of forests, seek parks when our thoughts grow heavy. The lesson remains the same. Peace is not invented. It is remembered. It waits in green things. As you listen, imagine yourself walking there. The gravel crunches softly beneath your steps. You smell thyme and rain. A bird sings once, then stops. You sit, not to think, but to listen. The air moves through the leaves like slow breath. For a moment, nothing demands, nothing argues. You are part of the same stillness that people once crossed oceans to find. The therapeutic gardens of the Enlightenment may have faded, but their message endures that the mind heals best when reminded of its roots. You do not need miracles, only the courage to be quiet among living things. So stay in this garden a little longer. Feel the world slow to the rhythm of wind and water. You are not escaping life. You are rejoining it. Imagine standing in a candlelit study sometime in the early 18th century. Books line the walls, thick tomes of philosophy beside volumes of alchemy and astronomy. A globe stands near the window, half shadowed by night. The smell of ink, wax, and dust fills the air. A man sits at his desk, head bowed over an experiment that looks more like a ritual than research. A glass vessel glows faintly. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls. Outside, the world divides itself into faith and reason. Inside, this man still believes they belong together. The Renaissance and Enlightenment promised clarity, light over darkness, reason over superstition. Yet the truth was never that simple. Many of the greatest thinkers of the era, scientists, physicians, and philosophers, moved in both worlds at once. They studied motion and gravity, but also angels and symbols. They measured stars and mixed herbs. They wrote equations by day and prayers by night. For them, science and spirituality were not enemies but reflections of the same mystery. The early chemists called themselves alchemists. They melted metals and distilled vapors, searching for the philosopher's stone, the mythical substance that could transform base matter into gold and perhaps grant immortality. But their work was not just greed, it was devotion. They believed that by purifying matter, they could purify the soul. Every experiment was a meditation on change. To heat, to dissolve, to transform, these were not only physical acts but spiritual ones. The laboratory was a chapel in disguise. Later, when natural philosophy evolved into modern science, that spiritual heartbeat remained. Isaac Newton, often celebrated as the father of reason, spent more time studying prophecy and alchemy than mathematics. He believed that divine order guided the universe, that each law of motion was also a law of faith. For him, to describe gravity was to describe God's touch. His equations were prayers written in numbers. This blending of reason and reverence shaped how people sought peace. A scholar might watch the movement of planets not only to predict eclipses but to feel connected to a cosmic rhythm. A physician might study anatomy with awe, convinced that the body itself was a divine machine. The more they learned, the more they sensed a presence behind the mechanism, a silence between the facts. In these moments, science was not cold, it was tender. The microscope became a window to wonder, the telescope a reminder of humility. Even the most rational minds confessed that understanding the universe did not quiet the heart. It only deepened the mystery. Knowledge became another form of prayer. Of course, the centuries that followed would try to separate them. Faith turned inward, science turned outward, but during that fragile bridge between the two, people found comfort in their union. They believed that the same laws guiding the stars might also guide the soul. To study creation was to feel safe within it. Imagine a doctor in that era, standing in his garden at night, staring up at the moon. He has spent the day bleeding patients, studying their pulses, writing careful notes. Yet now, under the quiet sky, he feels that the rhythm of those pulses and the pull of the moon are somehow the same. He does not need to prove it. The symmetry itself soothes him. It tells him that order exists, and in that order, rest. Even art carried this harmony. Painters filled their works with geometry and light, showing divine proportion in human faces. Architects built cathedrals that echoed mathematical perfection. Music wove sound into structure, each chord balanced like an equation. Beauty became proof that truth and grace could coexist. To experience either was to experience both. It is easy now to smile at their naivete, but there is wisdom in their approach. They understood that knowledge alone cannot comfort the heart, and faith without inquiry cannot satisfy the mind. Peace, they believed, came from holding both the certainty of mystery, the humility of knowing. As the centuries unfolded, the two paths diverged. Science became the language of fact, spirituality, the language of meaning, but the echo of that union lingers still. When we watch the stars, when we listen to music that makes us cry without reason, when we walk in nature and feel both small and whole, we touch that same balance. So as you listen now, imagine sitting in that candlelit study again. The flame trembles, your pen rests. Outside, the night is endless, but inside, you feel a quiet connection between what can be measured and what can only be felt. You realize that rest is born from the same balance, half thought, half surrender. Perhaps the scientists and mystics of the past were not confused after all. They knew that truth does not live in one world or the other, but in the silence where both meet. Picture a pale room at the end of the 19th century. Lace curtains filter weak daylight, and the faint smell of medicine hangs in the air. On the bed lies a woman in a white gown. She is not sick in the way that fever burns or bones break. Her illness is invisible, a trembling of the nerves, a fatigue without cause. The doctor has prescribed silence, solitude, and most of all, stillness. She must stay in bed for weeks, perhaps months, until her calm returns. This is the famous rest cure. The 19th century was an age of nervousness. Industry roared, cities swelled, and minds grew restless under the constant strain of modern life. Physicians began to speak of a new condition they called neurasthenia, a weakness of the nerves, a draining of energy and will. It was, they said, the price of civilization. The cure seemed obvious: remove the patient from all excitement, forbid exertion, and replace thought with rest. The most influential advocate of this treatment was an American doctor named Silas Weir Mitchell. He believed that exhaustion came from overuse of the brain, especially in sensitive or intellectual people. His method was strict. The patient was confined to bed, forbidden to read, write, or even converse for long. A nurse fed her rich meals, massaged her limbs, and reported her progress. The body, Mitchell claimed, would rebuild itself through immobility. The mind, stripped of strain, would learn peace. To modern ears, it sounds cruel, and in many cases, it was. The women subjected to the rest cure often felt themselves fading rather than recovering. Writers such as Charlotte Perkins Gilman later described it as a form of imprisonment, a well-meaning cruelty that mistook silence for healing. In her famous story of a woman locked away with only patterned wallpaper for company, she revealed the dark side of enforced calm. Yet beneath the failure lay a strange truth. The obsession with rest, though misguided, came from a real longing, a recognition that people were breaking under the new pace of the world. Railways, telegrams, machines, constant news, the human spirit had not evolved to keep up. Doctors saw nervous collapse everywhere and reached for the only medicine they understood: stillness. In some cases, it helped. Soldiers returned from war with trembling hands and hollow eyes. For them, quiet rooms and routine did bring comfort. Artists burned out by success found solace in long retreats by the sea, away from social demands. Even when the treatment was extreme, it reflected an awareness we still share, that the mind cannot endure endless motion. The imagery of the era tells its own story. Paintings of pale women resting on fainting couches, novels filled with delicate sensibilities and nervous exhaustion, these were mirrors of a culture that had begun to fear its own energy. Rest became both cure and cage. To lie still was to submit to control. To move was to risk collapse. Society, in its attempt to heal the anxious, often deepened the wound. The paradox remains familiar. We seek rest but turn it into another task. We chase peace as if it were a prize rather than a pause. The Victorians gave this struggle its first language. They named fatigue, diagnosed overwork, and demanded that life slow down even as they built faster trains and brighter cities. Imagine that woman again in her quiet room. The clock ticks softly. Outside, carriages roll down the street. She listens, half dreaming, to the muffled rhythm of the world she has been told to avoid. At first she resents it, then she begins to breathe with it. Her pulse steadies. For a moment she feels lighter, not healed, not whole, but suspended as if time itself has stopped to let her rest. This, perhaps, was the unspoken purpose of the rest cure: to give permission, to say, you may stop, you may let go. Even if the method was wrong, the desire behind it was universal, the yearning for stillness without guilt. The late 19th century treated calm as a prescription, something to be ordered by authority. But peace cannot be commanded, it must be invited. What the doctors failed to grasp was that rest without freedom is not rest at all. To force stillness is to make it another form of work. Yet their obsession left a legacy. Modern medicine, psychology, and wellness culture still echo their language, the exhaustion of nerves, the burnout of minds, the desperate need to disconnect. We may no longer lie in darkened rooms for months, but our digital lives recreate the same confinement in brighter colors. As you listen now, consider the irony. The Victorians sought calm through control. We seek it through distraction. Both forget the same truth. Peace begins not in the body nor in the bed, but in the permission to be unfinished. Imagine walking into a Victorian apothecary. Shelves of dark glass bottles rise to the ceiling, each labelled in curling gold letters: laudanum, mercury, belladonna, and among them a small white tin marked complexion wafers. The chemist smiles politely as you approach. He explains that these delicate wafers, taken daily, will purify the blood, clear the skin, and soothe the nerves. The ingredients: a little sugar, a little starch, and a trace of arsenic. Yes, arsenic, the same poison used to kill rats and rivals, now sold as a beauty aid and tonic for calm. The Victorians, obsessed with refinement, found elegance even in danger. Pale skin meant purity, composure, control. To look serene was to be respected, and so, in pursuit of that perfect stillness, people consumed the very thing that could stop the heart that sought it. It was a strange age, one that believed beauty and morality were linked. A calm face was a virtuous one, a pale complexion suggested gentility, hard labor left color and muscle signs of the working class. But smooth, quiet pallor belonged to the delicate and refined. Society's cure for unrest, therefore, was not to find peace within, but to paint it upon the body. The arsenic wafer promised more than beauty. Advertisements claimed it would settle the nerves, lift the mood, even help sleep. Doctors spoke of its ability to cool the blood. Women and men alike began taking it daily, trusting that a small dose of poison could restore balance to a restless world. In drawing rooms and parlors, people whispered about their secret tablets as if they were charms against anxiety, and perhaps, for a time, they worked. Arsenic in tiny amounts slows the pulse, dulls sensation, and brings a faint, deceptive calm. The skin grows pale and smooth as circulation weakens. The lips lose color. The eyes shine with a strange brightness. It was not health, but the appearance of tranquility, a deadly illusion of peace. Imagine the contradiction. A society desperate for vitality taking poison to appear serene. The same empire that filled its cities with smoke and steel sought purity through chemicals that silenced the body. Calm had become cosmetic. Many physicians warned against it, of course. But fear has little power against vanity, especially when vanity hides deeper pain. Beneath the lace and manners, the Victorians lived with constant pressure, moral, social, industrial. To show strain was to fail. So they swallowed their anxieties, quite literally, in powdered form. In Austria and rural England, some even claimed that regular doses of arsenic improved strength and appetite. Farmers and hunters boasted of their resilience, calling themselves arsenic eaters. Their skin turned waxen, their tolerance rising until they could consume amounts that would kill others. Visitors wrote of these men and women with fascination and horror, as if peace itself had taken on a toxic form. It is easy to judge them now, but their hunger for calm feels familiar. We, too, medicate our exhaustion. We, too, seek shortcuts to serenity, pills for sleep, drinks for courage, screens for distraction. The difference is only in chemistry. The longing remains the same. In the dim light of that apothecary, the wafers looked innocent enough. They came in silver tins, embossed with flowers, sold alongside perfumes and soaps. The language was gentle, promising rest to the spirit and radiance to the complexion. To a society built on appearances, the product fit perfectly. You could buy calm, you could swallow grace, but the truth could not stay hidden. Slowly, cases appeared in newspapers, trembling hands, failing hearts, young women who fell asleep and did not wake. The beauty that promised serenity revealed its price. Doctors began to warn that what smoothed the face also stilled the breath. Yet, even after the danger became known, the fashion lingered. Some could not give it up. They said they felt more alive with their daily dose, more balanced, more peaceful. Addiction was a word not yet spoken, but its shadow lay over every elegant breakfast tray. The story of arsenic wafers is not just about poison. It is about the illusion of control. The Victorians believed that if they could master the body, they could master the mind. They tried to paint serenity onto their skin, to measure calm in milligrams. But peace cannot be consumed. It must be lived. Imagine one of them now, a young woman by her mirror, brushing her hair before bed. She swallows her wafer, touches her cheek, and smiles faintly. She does not know that her heartbeat has slowed, that her calm is the calm of surrender. Outside, the city hums with carriages and rain. Inside, she feels nothing at all. Her reflection is flawless, smooth, composed, empty. She looks exactly as her world demanded, serene. Centuries later, the tins have vanished, but the lesson remains. We still chase peace as a surface, still treat rest as decoration. Picture a drawing room at the dawn of the 20th century. The gas lamps hum softly, and in the center of the room stands a strange contraption, a chair of polished wood and brass, surrounded by wires and shining metal coils. The doctor gestures proudly. He calls it an electrotherapeutic recliner. The patient, nervous but curious, sits down. A faint vibration hums beneath the seat. Sparks flicker blue against the brass rings. "Do not be alarmed," the doctor says. "You will feel only a pleasant tingling." Electricity had become the new miracle. It promised to light cities, drive machines, and, perhaps, heal the body. The Victorians and early moderns believed it carried the secret force of life itself, invisible, powerful, divine. If lightning could split a tree, perhaps a gentler current could repair the nerves. And so, a new industry was born, electric medicine. Devices appeared everywhere. Some looked like furniture, others like instruments of mystery. There were belts that delivered small shocks to the spine, combs that sent current through the scalp, even baths with wires that pulsed gently through the water. Advertisements claimed that electricity could cure melancholy, anxiety, sleeplessness, even moral weakness. For every ailment, a spark. At first, it must have felt like wonder. Patients described the thrill of the current, the warmth spreading through tired muscles, the sense of being reawakened. They said it cleared the fog of thought, sharpened the senses, lifted the mood. Doctors spoke of recharging the body as if it were a machine, restoring the lost energy of modern life. But behind the excitement was something deeper, a fascination with control. Electricity could be measured, tamed, and delivered at will. It made the invisible visible. People longed for that mastery, the ability to harness chaos and call it calm. They were tired of prayers and potions. They wanted science to touch the soul. Not all of it was harmless. Some devices burned the skin or jolted the heart. The line between stimulation and pain was thin. Yet the craze continued. Parlors offered electric massages. Traveling salesmen carried small generators from town to town, demonstrating their wares on willing volunteers. The audience gasped, laughed, and sometimes fainted. The spectacle itself became a kind of entertainment, shock as performance, rest as display. There was even a belief that electricity could renew youth. Men sat for hours with metal pads strapped to their temples, hoping to revive fading memory. Women wore electrified corsets, said to restore vigor and grace. The gentle hum of power became the lullaby of progress. The more the world accelerated, the more people trusted its newest force to deliver calm. Imagine the feeling of that first jolt, sharp, bright, then strangely soothing. The body tenses, then releases. For a brief moment, awareness heightens, thoughts dissolve. Perhaps this was the beginning of biofeedback, of understanding how sensation could lead to relaxation. In their crude experiments, those doctors stumbled upon truths that science would rediscover centuries later, that the mind and body are not separate, that rhythm and repetition can ease the nervous system. Yet their pursuit of calm through current also revealed a paradox. The very energy that powered progress was the one they tried to use against it. They sought peace in the same force that made their world restless. Electricity lit their nights, drove their factories, filled their cities with noise. Now it buzzed against their skin, promising relief from the life it created. The advertisements were poetic. Banish exhaustion with the power of the heavens, one claimed. The lightning of life restored, another promised gentle shocks of serenity. The language mixed science with salvation, as if God himself had passed his gift through copper wires. But true rest cannot be commanded by current. The spark can awaken, but it cannot soothe. The more they shocked, the more dependent they became on stimulation. It was a pattern the modern world would repeat, replacing electricity with caffeine, with information, with endless motion. Each era finds its own device to imitate calm. Still, one can imagine the comfort those people felt, sitting in quiet rooms lit by new light, believing they had found a bridge between body and soul. The hum of the machine filled the silence, masking the loneliness of progress. The glow against the walls must have felt like dawn breaking indoors. For a moment, it must have seemed that peace was finally a matter of technology, not spirit. Yet the truth remained the same as in all ages. Stillness is not created by force. It cannot be wired into the body. It must arise when effort stops. The real electricity was not in the machine, but in the human heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, alive. Picture the early 20th century, the hum of engines, the glare of electric lamps, the endless rhythm of machines. The world that had once moved at the pace of footsteps now pulsed with the heartbeat of progress. Trains cut through the countryside, telegraphs carried messages faster than thought. Cities glowed through the night, refusing darkness its rest. Humanity, proud of its triumph over silence, began to forget what stillness felt like. In this new world, exhaustion became the quiet epidemic of modernity. Doctors spoke of nervous collapse, writers of shattered focus, philosophers of a soul stretched thin. The Industrial Revolution had promised comfort but delivered momentum. People could travel farther, work longer, see more, yet the cost was invisible. The body was still flesh, but life had become mechanical. Factories and offices demanded precision, not rhythm. Clocks replaced seasons. The worker's day was measured in minutes and machines. Even leisure was timed. Rest became another task, something to schedule, quantify, perfect. A century that worshipped energy forgot that peace was not its opposite, but its balance. Advertising mirrored this fever. Magazines promised tonics for fatigue, pills for sleep, devices to increase vitality. Conquer tiredness, they said. Defeat drowsiness. Fatigue was treated as weakness rather than warning. The word stimulation became a virtue. Cafes overflowed with coffee drinkers, their cups small but endless. Tobacco smoke curled through the air like a flag of defiance against stillness. To be calm was to be left behind. Writers noticed the change. They described cities as living creatures, restless, glowing, insomniac. Crowds moved like tides through electric streets. The night no longer belonged to dreams. It belonged to labor, entertainment, speed. In that endless light, the human mind lost its shadows, and with them, its rest. Psychologists of the age began to study attention. They found that constant motion fractured it, that the brain could not truly relax while bombarded by novelty. But their warnings were drowned out by noise. The thrill of modernity was too seductive. People wanted to feel alive, even if it meant feeling never still. At home, the same paradox continued. The telephone brought voices closer, but silence further away. Radios filled living rooms with endless sound music, news, chatter comforting, yet relentless. Rest had to compete with volume. Families gathered not in quiet conversation but around the mechanical heartbeat of their devices. Even solitude became crowded. Artists responded by painting chaos cities swirling with light, people blurred by motion. The new beauty was speed itself. To stop was to fall behind. Even sleep, once sacred, became shallow. Doctors measured it, analyzed it, sold pills to lengthen it. Night became another frontier of productivity. The body was expected to rest efficiently, to recover as quickly as a machine refuels. And yet, beneath the hum, people longed for slowness. The same generation that built factories also built parks, museums, and libraries, sanctuaries of quiet in the storm. They sensed, perhaps unconsciously, that without silence, progress would devour itself. The public garden, the reading room, the quiet carriage on the train, these were the last refuges of the human pace. Imagine one of those travelers sitting by the train window at dusk. The landscape rushes past fields, lights, smoke, and in the glass, his own reflection flickers. For a moment, he sees not motion but stillness. The speed outside makes the calm inside visible. He breathes. He realizes that rest is not absence of movement, but a kind of surrender within it, the ability to be still even while the world runs. That realization was fragile, and it remained so. The age of overstimulation never ended. It only changed shape. The machines became smaller, the noise digital. We now carry the hum in our pockets. Our cities never sleep, our minds never stop. We have inherited the same fatigue, dressed in brighter light, but perhaps the lesson has not vanished. The early moderns, even at their most restless, left us a warning. They showed us that stimulation is not the same as vitality, and that noise does not equal life. They taught, through their exhaustion, that silence is not the enemy of progress, it is its foundation. So, as you listen now, imagine the city at night. The last tram rattles down the street, lights dim one by one, and somewhere above it all, a single window remains open to the cool air. Someone inside sits quietly, watching the world fade. No sound, no rush, only breath. That is what peace looked like in the age of overstimulation, rare, fragile, luminous. And perhaps, even now, it still does. Imagine waking in the middle of the night to the glow of a small screen. The room is quiet, yet your mind hums with the static of unfinished thoughts, messages waiting, alarms set, worries circling like restless birds. You tell yourself you will sleep soon, just one more scroll, one more glance at the world beyond the dark, but the silence never comes. You are not alone in this. The modern age has replaced the roar of factories with the hum of information, and still we are tired. Still, we crave calm. It is a strange inheritance. Thousands of years have passed since the Roman baths, the Egyptian dream temples, the monastic chants. Yet the human heart beats with the same rhythm, the same need for pause. Progress has changed our tools, but not our nature. We still seek the same thing the ancients sought, a moment when the noise stops and something larger than thought takes over. In our time, the noise is not outside but inside. The world no longer ends at the city gate. It lives in our hands, our pockets, our minds. We carry the marketplace with us, the arguments, the envy, the hunger for attention. Each vibration of the phone is another echo of the medieval bell, calling us back to duty. We obey, thinking it will quiet us. It does not. That is why the search for calm has never disappeared, only changed shape. Some run towards silence through meditation, others through movement. Some escape into nature, others into stories or music. The forms differ, but the instinct is the same, to find a rhythm that matches the body's hidden pulse, to feel part of a pattern larger than the day's demands. The paradox is that we often create the chaos we wish to escape. We chase stimulation to avoid stillness, fearing that quiet will reveal what busyness hides. But the body remembers. It knows that calm is not emptiness but alignment, the moment when breath, thought, and world move together without resistance. We have forgotten how to listen to that rhythm, but it has not forgotten us. Our ancestors built temples and gardens to make peace visible. We build apps and rituals, searching for digital sanctuaries that mimic the same relief. The difference is not in the desire, but in the attention. They looked outward toward gods and seasons. We look inward toward screens and selves. Yet both gestures point to the same hunger, the wish to be held by something gentle, something that asks nothing in return. Perhaps that is why stories of rest still move us. A monk reading by candlelight, a woman sleeping by a holy spring, a philosopher listening to silence. They remind us that calm has always been an act of rebellion. To slow down in a world that worships speed is to reclaim power. To rest when others perform is to resist. The Romans understood it as mastery. The monks called it grace. We might simply call it survival. Imagine, for a moment, what it means to live without pause, to eat without tasting, to work without thinking, to scroll without seeing. The mind becomes a clenched fist that never opens. Rest, then, is not laziness, it is the unmaking of that fist. It is the letting go of everything that demands you remain hard. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, of a traveler who once asked an old monk why he prayed for hours each day. The monk smiled and said, "Because when I stop, the world stops falling apart." That is the essence of calm, not the end of chaos, but the ability to stand unbroken inside it. As you listen now, you might notice your own breath. It is slow, steady, older than every machine you own. It connects you to every person who ever paused to find peace, the dreamers in Egyptian temples, the pilgrims at medieval springs, the philosophers in Greek courtyards. Their world is gone, but their silence remains, carried through time like a heartbeat. Why do we still seek calm in chaos? Because the chaos never truly ends, and because something inside us refuses to be consumed by it. We return to stillness the way rivers return to the sea, not to escape the world, but to remember where it began. So, breathe. Let the hum of the modern age fade to a whisper. The world will continue to turn without your effort. For a moment, you can simply exist. That is all the calm you need. Imagine dawn breaking over an ancient field. The sky glows softly, the air cool, the horizon wide and unbroken. A shepherd stands alone, listening to the quiet before the first sound of his flock. He feels the weight of his cloak, the faint wind on his face, the distant rhythm of life waking around him. There are no clocks, no letters, no noise of industry, only the vast stillness of a world that asks for nothing. That silence, simple and alive, was the teacher of our ancestors. The ancients did not separate stillness from living. It was not something they sought in temples alone, but something woven through their days. Farmers worked by sunlight, sailors by tides, philosophers by the turning of seasons. Their rhythm matched the earth's labor and pause, action and rest, noise and quiet. Even in the heart of their greatest cities, time flowed at a human pace. Stillness was not emptiness to them. It was fullness, the presence of the divine, the balance between heart and world. To stop moving was not to lose momentum. It was to align with forces larger than one's own. The Egyptians built temples to silence where dreams spoke more clearly than words. The Greeks believed that listening inward could reveal harmony, the same way a musician hears balance in a chord. The Romans, in their way, practiced control, finding peace not in withdrawal but in mastery over impulse. Each civilization, though different, shared a single truth. The body and the mind cannot be divided. The spirit speaks through breath, through heartbeat, through the rhythm of daily acts. To rest the body was to open the soul. To quiet the soul was to strengthen the body. The stillness they practiced was not escape, it was connection. In modern life, we mistake stillness for absence, for a gap to be filled. The ancients understood it as presence. They knew that silence has texture, that pause has meaning, that waiting is not waste. To sit by a river, to watch smoke rise from incense, to let thought drift like wind through reeds, these were not indulgences. They were conversations with existence itself. We often imagine the past as noisy with battle and hardship, yet its deepest wisdom came from the spaces between those struggles. After the harvest, the fields rested. After prayer, the temple was silent. After victory, there was mourning and reflection. They accepted that every rhythm must have its pause, that renewal is impossible without stillness. Stillness also carried humility. To stop was to remember one's scale in the order of things. The stars moved without effort. The sea breathed without struggle. Humanity was not the center but the participant. The quiet mind could sense that balance, could feel small yet secure within it. That awareness, once natural, now feels foreign to us. We have replaced it with constant noise, the hum of traffic, the buzz of screens, the chatter of endless opinions. We call it connection, but it is closer to interruption. Imagine standing where that shepherd stood, the air still cool, the world still unhurried. You breathe, and the breath feels ancient. The stillness does not demand, it receives. It holds you without judgment, without expectation. That was the wisdom our ancestors carried, that peace does not come from conquering the world, but from ceasing to resist it. In temples and fields alike, they practiced a kind of surrender we have forgotten. It was not weakness, but understanding. The Egyptians lay down in sacred sleep, trusting dreams to guide them. The monks of later centuries would follow that same pattern, listening for divine whisper in the quiet of their cells. Stillness was their bridge between seen and unseen, human and eternal. When storms came, political, personal, cosmic, they did not always fight them. They waited, they watched, they trusted that the same forces that tore could also heal. This patience was their strength. It kept them from drowning in change. Perhaps that is what they understood best, that the world is loud enough without our help, and that silence is not withdrawal but wisdom. In every culture, in every language, the word for peace carries the sound of breath, a sigh, a release, an exhale. It is the sound of surrender, but also of life continuing. So, as you listen now, Think of those who stood before you in that same quiet: shepherds, monks, philosophers, dreamers. Their stillness was not a technique, it was a truth. The earth taught it, and the body remembered it. Stillness, they would say, is not the absence of movement, but the balance within it. It is knowing when to stop, when to breathe, when to listen. The ancients knew that wisdom begins not in speech, but in silence. And perhaps, beneath all our progress, we are still trying to learn the same lesson, that the world does not need to slow down for us to be calm. We only need to remember how to stop inside it. Imagine a park on a quiet afternoon. A few clouds drift lazily above the trees. Children's laughter fades somewhere in the distance, and a single leaf spirals to the ground. You sit on a bench, your hands empty, your mind wandering without direction. For a moment, you are not working, not striving, not even thinking clearly. You are simply here doing nothing. And in that nothing, something inside begins to breathe again. To do nothing used to be an art. In older times, leisure was a sign not of waste, but of wisdom. The Greeks called it skole, the origin of our word for school. To them, leisure was not idleness, but the state in which thought could grow. A mind at rest was fertile, not empty. It was space for ideas to form, for meaning to surface. The Romans practiced a similar concept, otium, the balance between action and reflection. A statesman or philosopher withdrew from the public eye not to escape duty, but to restore clarity before returning to it. Somewhere along the way, that art vanished. The modern world replaced stillness with productivity, leisure with guilt. We measure time by output, attention by urgency, and worth by exhaustion. We fear inactivity as though it were a kind of death. But the ancients understood the opposite, that a life without pause is the one that truly dies. In medieval monasteries, silence and idleness were not the same. To sit quietly in a garden, to read slowly, to pray without asking, these were not indulgences. They were ways to remember one's place in the pattern of things. To do nothing was to acknowledge that the world continues without your constant effort. It was humility disguised as rest. Today, even our leisure is filled with motion. We scroll, watch, reply, consume. Our minds never touch the ground. When we finally stop, we panic at the emptiness that greets us. The body, unaccustomed to stillness, mistakes calm for boredom and peace for loss. We have forgotten how to let silence stretch. The art of doing nothing is not laziness. It is the practice of being present without purpose. It means walking with no destination, sitting without plan, listening without needing to answer. It means reclaiming the parts of ourselves buried under obligation. The moment we stop measuring time, time expands, the air grows wide, the senses sharpen, and the smallest things, the ticking of a clock, the flicker of light through leaves, begin to feel sacred again. The thinkers of the Renaissance wrote of this as contemplation. Artists called it inspiration. Monks called it grace. Whatever the name, the principle was the same. Only in emptiness can truth appear. A full mind cannot reflect, it only reacts. To clear the surface of thought is to allow insight to rise naturally, like a reflection returning to still water. Imagine a philosopher in his garden centuries ago. The tools of his trade books, papers, pens lie untouched. He watches ants move through grass, follows the arc of a bird across the sky, listens to wind in the branches. He is not wasting time, he is learning how to belong to it. We, too, could learn again. To do nothing is to trust life. It is to say, the world will not collapse if I step away. It is to discover that silence is not the absence of meaning, but its source. Our culture of constant noise calls it unproductive. But creation itself, whether of thought, art, or kindness, begins in the pause before action. Even nature rests. The trees stand silent in winter, the sea stills at dawn before the first wind rises. Animals sleep without shame. The universe itself moves through cycles of light and shadow, expansion and calm. Why should we imagine we are different? Perhaps that is why doing nothing feels so radical now, because it demands trust. To stop without reason is to surrender control. Yet every great truth begins there. Stillness reveals what activity hides. The moment we stop filling the air with effort, we begin to hear the quieter voice beneath it, the one that whispers, "You are enough even when you are still." So, as you listen now, give yourself permission to do nothing. Not for a purpose, not for recovery, not even for meditation, simply for its own sake. Watch the air move. Feel the small rhythm of your breath. The world will go on turning. You do not need to chase it. Doing nothing is not absence, it is return. It is the space in which we remember what being alive feels like before the next demand calls us away. And perhaps, in rediscovering that lost art, we find the oldest form of wisdom, that peace does not have to be earned. It only has to be allowed. Imagine a room just before dawn. The world outside still sleeps. The air holds that fragile pause between darkness and light. You can hear your own breath, steady and slow, and the faint rhythm of your heart. Nothing moves, and yet everything feels alive. This is the sound of silence, not emptiness, but presence. A space where time softens and the self begins to unfold. Silence has followed humanity through every age. It whispered in the deserts where prophets walked, filled the cloisters of monks, lingered above the still waters of ancient springs. Long before we learned to name our emotions, we listened to quiet to understand them. In silence, the mind arranges itself. Thoughts settle like sand after a storm. Truth rises slowly, not in noise, but in stillness. The ancients revered silence as a teacher. They believed it held messages from gods, nature, or the inner self. The Greeks practiced it as philosophy, the monks as prayer, the mystics as surrender. They understood something we often forget, that silence is not the absence of communication, but its deepest form. It is where the unspoken finds shape. In the medieval world, silence could mean obedience, reflection, or peace. In the modern world, it feels like defiance. We live surrounded by chatter voices, music, traffic, constant alerts. We measure our worth by what we produce, what we say, what we share. To be silent now is to refuse the performance. It is to reclaim the private space where no one else can reach. Yet silence is not always comfortable. It can reveal what noise conceals: loneliness, grief, confusion. That is why we flee from it. But only by facing that quiet do we discover what truly matters. When the world's voices fade, our own becomes clearer. Silence does not erase pain, it makes it honest. Imagine standing in a forest at dusk. The air is cool, and every sound, the crack of a branch, the whisper of leaves, feels deliberate. You realize that nature is never truly silent. It simply speaks more softly than we do. The world is full of quiet languages: the pulse of wind, the hush of snow, the rhythm of waves. To hear them is to remember that stillness is not absence but harmony. Philosophers once said that the universe itself began in silence, that before the first word, before light or sound, there was a calm so complete that creation had to break it. Every sound we make is an echo of that first interruption. To return to silence, even for a moment, is to return home. In hospitals and temples, in libraries and empty streets at night, silence still holds its power. It restores what noise erodes: attention, humility, connection. It reminds us that presence does not need performance. When we stop filling every gap, we begin to hear the texture of being alive. The drip of water, the ticking of a clock, the sound of our own breath, these are not interruptions. They are reminders that we exist, that life continues quietly even when the world forgets to listen. Perhaps the greatest gift of silence is that it cannot be owned. You cannot buy it, teach it, or control it. It arrives when you stop trying. It waits patiently behind every word, behind every heartbeat, behind the endless motion of the world. So, let it return now. Let the noise of the day fade to a distant hum. Let thought grow slow, like the last ripple on water before it stills. In that pause, feel the world breathing with you, not demanding, not judging, simply being. Silence is the oldest comfort we know. It is the space between heartbeats, the moment before dawn, the breath before speech. It asks nothing and gives everything. And when you finally open your eyes again, you may realize that silence never left. It was waiting all along underneath every sound, behind every thought, patient as time itself. And now, as the night deepens, we return to the question that began our journey. How did people once relax, and what does their rest say about us? We have wandered through time, the Roman halls of indulgence, the Egyptian temples of dreaming, the monastic cells of quiet reading, the Renaissance rooms of curiosity, the Victorian chambers of nervous calm. Every age, in its own way, built rituals to contain the same longing, the wish to be at peace inside a restless world. The names and tools changed, but the desire never did. The ancients sought stillness through rhythm, the monks found it through order, the dreamers through surrender. The Victorians, even in their mistakes, searched for the same invisible doorway we still knock upon. Beneath all their strange inventions and beliefs lay one truth. Peace does not come from the absence of effort, but from harmony with it. We, their descendants, live surrounded by comfort and noise, yet still chase what they already knew, that calm is not a place or a product. It is a practice. It waits in silence, in breath, in the moment we stop measuring our worth by motion. The art of rest has never been about escape. It is about remembering who we are when the world no longer asks us to perform. So perhaps tonight, as you listen to the quiet between words, you can feel that thread connecting you to them, to the monks, the dreamers, the healers, the seekers. They learned that rest is not something we take. It is something we return to. Let the noise fade. Let the body soften. The world will wait. You have arrived at what every century, every civilization, every restless heart has been searching for, the still point in time where everything, finally, is at peace.